The Legion 7s are gorgeous laptops, premium devices designed for gamers and creators who require some portability. This new version, the 7A, comes with a thoughtfully redesigned chassis and AMD's new Gorgon Point processor, which is a refresh of their older Strix Point chips. Moving over to an AMD chip is why it ends with A now instead of I for Intel. This processor is less powerful than the Intel HX CPU last year's 7i came with, and of course we don't love to see that downgrade. But for a thin and light gaming laptop, a lower-powered processor does afford it a smaller cooling solution, which makes for a smaller chassis and a lighter laptop. This one has a smaller footprint than the 7i and weighs less. This update also gives us longer battery life. Unfortunately, the Gorgon Point CPU is very disappointing and uncompetitive with Panther Lake being rolled out in other new laptops. And at the time we made this review, the fact that this laptop costs a little more than the Legion 7i with a more powerful HX chip and 5070 makes it hard to recommend right now. Buying the Legion 7a is really going to be dependent on whether you get it at a good price. That's why we've built our website, bestlaptop.deals, where we track prices right across retailers. We even call out when a price drops enough to make a laptop like this one a good or great deal. Overall, the Legion 7a is still a nice laptop that performs decently, and we like the smaller and lighter chassis. So let's jump into the review. We'll start with the performance of this new Gorgon Point chip. In summary, we're pretty underwhelmed. This specific CPU is called the Ryzen AI9 HX 470 chip, which is a direct replacement of last year's HX 370 chip. It has the same mix of Zen 5 and Zen 5C cores, same TDP, and it only boosts 100 MHz higher than that one at 5.2 GHz. We thought that would at least mean it performed a little better than the 370 in similarly thin and light laptops, but that's where we were wrong. In Geekbench, the 470 does around the same as the 370 chip in the ProArt P16, which is another thin, portable laptop with dedicated graphics. It also does worse in multi-core than both prior versions of the Legion 7i with Intel's Arrow Lake HX chips and last year's Zephyrus G16 with Arrow Lake H. HX is Intel's most powerful line of chips, and Arrow Lake H is the more mid-range one, being replaced by Panther Lake H early this year. So AMD needs to get in gear. Moving over to Cinebench, it's a similar story. It's on the lower end of its competition and now a little worse than its predecessor in both single and multi-core, which is wild. Worse yet, it draws more power than the ProArt in a 10-minute test on 2026, and its CPU gets a bit hotter. Some of this may be due, of course, to the differences in the two chassis and their cooling solutions. Keep in mind, all the processors we are showing you here are higher performing ones, so the 7a is still a powerful laptop. Now, its keyboard deck lands around the middle in terms of warmth you feel, and it has comparable fan noise to these other powerful laptops. But that's still disappointing, as the ProArt beats it and feels more comfortable. In its other modes, it stays a bit quieter. You only get an 11% drop in performance going down to its lowest mode, quiet, while getting a major reduction in fan noise. 43 decibels sounds very calm in comparison to 54. The keyboard deck also stays cooler when it's not pushing the CPU as hard, and the power draw is nearly halved. This just goes to show that there are significant diminishing marginal returns of feeding these Gorgon Point CPUs this much power. Now let's move over to graphics performance. The 7i offers up to a 5070, but the 7a only offers a 5060 so far, which we found to be a bit disappointing. We would have really liked to see it get a bump up to a 5070 Ti, as that has more VRAM, but we know that one uses a different motherboard, and it might have stopped them from slimming down this chassis. Performance-wise, it's dead last in our comparison, but this is about what we expected given its components. It's worse than the ProArt and Arrow with mid-wattage 5070s and similar processors, and much worse than the Legions with the more powerful Intel HX chips. In Port Royal, which tests ray tracing, we see the 5i, 7i, and 7a with the 5060 basically tie, which makes sense as they all have the same GPU at the same wattage, and this test doesn't rely on CPU nearly at all. In actual gaming, the 7a is held back a little bit by its less powerful chip. We can see this in all of the games we ran, where the drop from the 7i with the 255 HX chip and a 5060 down to the 7a was consistently around 6% in average FPS. This is a good time to bring up the pricing, though. Because the 7i with Intel's better 275HX chip and a 5070 is actually $100 cheaper than the higher-end version of the 7a we have here. If we compare those two, the 5070 7i to the 5060 7a, we're seeing a much larger delta. It's anywhere from 13% in Forza Horizon 5, where we do not utilize FrameGen or upscaling, all the way to 19% in Cyberpunk with FrameGen still off and DLSS upscaling set to balanced. We no longer had the 5070 version in to test it in the newer Marvel Rivals, but we've noticed this game is pretty CPU-bound, so we'd expect the 7i to perform much better. Something to note, though, is that many laptops struggle to increase or even maintain 1% lows when turning on FrameGen, and that does not seem to be a problem for the 7a. This might be new optimizations or something else, but either way, it's nice to see. Looking at the different power modes for Forza, there are trade-offs on all of them. Sure, you can save a good amount of fan noise if you step down a mode, but the temperatures you feel on the keyboard deck get warmer. Also, we'd suggest thinking twice about stepping down to quiet mode. In Forza, it only shows a small drop in frames, but in a CPU-bound game, 15 watts to the CPU may be too low. Since we think these gaming laptops are good for creators like us, we also test them on the Puget benchmarking suite for Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve. The reason we don't do Photoshop on the laptops with dedicated graphics is because it almost always runs great, and the benchmark tends to be a little inaccurate on DGPUs, according to the Puget team. In video editing benchmarks like Premiere Pro, it does well. Again, not as well as many of its competitors, but very usable for most projects like ours. I actually use the laptops we are testing to play through our 4K videos and do early stage reviews. I found this one to be very smooth on playback. I was able to play it at 1/2 resolution on my 4K monitor with no issues. The fan noise did ramp up a bit, but I didn't find it high-pitched or annoying. Hot air doesn't blow on your mouse hand, which is nice, and the keyboard deck didn't get very warm at all. Very comfortable for this kind of thing, and I was pleasantly surprised given it's only a 5060. In DaVinci Resolve, it lands on the lower end, which means that the worst CPU likely does have a bit of an effect in this application. Now, let's talk performance on battery and how long it can last for light tasks. Firstly, it performs decently well when unplugged, where it loses about 10% of its performance. Even better, it also lasts quite a long time on battery. Lenovo does offer an iGPU mode, which disables the dedicated GPU in their Legion Space app. It does not require a restart if you're moving from their hybrid mode, so we were able to take advantage of that setting. This is our new battery test, where we set the brightness to a higher 300 nits. We still set the refresh rate to 60 Hz, and we left Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on. We want to be able to have our battery tests be consistent and repeatable, but also somewhat realistic. We've received feedback that our results were longer than what people were getting in the real world. This is why we've upped the brightness this year and fully moved over to the Microsoft Office suite for a rundown rather than video playback. You'll notice the 7i with the 5070 will be missing from this graph as well because we no longer have it. Regardless, the 7a does very well here, as I said. For a gaming laptop, 7.5 hours is pretty solid. It would at least get you through a plane ride if you're doing only basic office work. Speaking of traveling, let's talk about how much more portable this new 7a is, because this might be the deciding factor for some folks. The first thing you'll notice when you're looking at it is the lack of what we call a stadium in the back. This is the bit on the 7i that extends backwards past the back of the screen, usually for better cooling and airflow. As we've shown you, the thermals haven't changed much between the 7i and the 7a, so no sacrifices for the reduction in laptop size. Josh was especially excited about this change as it means he can finally fit it in his standard laptop sleeve, which the 7i does not fit into. This is still not the smallest laptop, though, even without the stadium. Both the ProArt P16 and the Zephyrus G16 are a bit shorter and slimmer. On the other hand, they actually weigh more than the Legion. The 7a is incredibly light for its size. Beating the Zephyrus G16 here is pretty impressive, since we tend to consider it one of the most portable 16-inch gaming laptops. Even though the 7a is more lightweight, it still has good build quality like last year with very minimal screen and deck flex. There is still a sleek metal strip going around the whole outside of the laptop, and it gives it a very clean look in the white especially. Our only nit, as Josh would say, is that we are already noticing some missing paint on the edges of the chassis where they meet the metal strip. There are small little flakes that must have chipped off on a few spots around the edge. This is disappointing, but did not happen on our Legion 7i, so we are hopeful this is a one-off with our unit. We've contacted Lenovo about it and let them know. A fun thing this year is that it is also offered in a darker color they are calling Nebula. It looks very nice, and I'm a sucker for blue, but I am worried that it will pick up fingerprints more than the white version where they are virtually non-existent because the new one is so dark. Let's go over some other things that haven't changed. For the screen, we believe they are using the same 2560 by 1600 OLED panel here, and it is still beautiful and vivid. Very color accurate, over 500 nits of brightness, 240 Hz refresh rate, no noticeable screen door effect or PWM flickering, one of our favorite displays all around. It isn't quite as crisp as something like the 2.8K ProArt or even higher res MacBook Pro 16, but it's a nice balance for anyone who also wants to be able to game. Those higher resolution screens can make it tougher to get high FPS, especially on this mid-range hardware. The RGB keyboard is still one of the best out there. It has a satisfying click, which Josh and I both enjoy a lot, but I like that it's still soft enough to type quickly. The number pad makes it a bit off-center, which Seth doesn't tend to prefer, but he still thinks this is one of the best. Another nice thing about the keyboard is that it has full-sized arrow keys. Many laptops choose form over function here and make their up and down keys really small so that they can align with the bottom of the keyboard, but there's no such problem here. The trackpad is still mechanical, not too loud, but a bit clunky compared to haptic ones found on other premium thin and light laptops like the MacBook Pros. Many creators might also be considering one of those instead of a Windows laptop with an NVIDIA GPU. For ports, it has the same ones, which means an HDMI 2.1 port that connects to the DGPU, a UHS 2 SD card reader, a USB-A port on either side, one of which is always on, and 2 USB-C ports on the left side alongside a headphone mic combo jack. The webcam is the same as last year, 5 megapixels, it does shoot at 1440p, and it has IR for Windows Hello. For upgradability and maintenance, this laptop is still reasonably accessible. The back has 8 Phillips head screws, and inside are 2 1TB M.2 SSDs, one of which could be full-sized, a replaceable Wi-Fi 7 card, and 84 watt-hour battery. Unfortunately, in another downgrade from last year, the RAM is not easily accessible or replaceable. It is listed as having LPDDR5X, which is soldered. The next thing to go over is that there are more speaker grills now. This was a complaint for some folks last year since both speaker grills were downward facing and sounded pretty muted. There are now some seated underneath the screen in between the 2 hinges. Thanks to this, the sound is much louder, more full, and even has a bit more bass. Unfortunately, they are still laptop speakers, so there is some muddiness, but this is a nice improvement. Take a listen. You may have noticed we didn't test Linux on this laptop. After our framework video from last year, we discovered that getting an NVIDIA GPU to work properly on Linux is really rough. Plus, many games don't run or don't run well. For enthusiasts who aren't afraid of a lot of setup, sure, go for it. But for most gamers, we just don't recommend it, and that's why we removed it from our gaming laptop testing. In conclusion, the Legion 7a is a nice, premium laptop with decent performance that gives you solid portability. It's just not as exceptional as its predecessor, the Legion 7i. And on that note, you can currently buy that laptop for $100 cheaper, which makes it a tough choice, especially given how much better the 7i performs with its higher-end Intel HX processor and more powerful 5070 GPU. That's pretty much it from us, though. We have a ton of new laptops here that we are rolling for reviews, so get subscribed with the notification bell on to be the first to know. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.